All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Anyone who's not here this morning can definitely take a look at our recording of this. We should have that up typically by the afternoon, and if y'all can come in and make comments that time if you have any questions later on in the day. But we'll go ahead and get going. I'm Ben Trest, one of the landscape specialists here at Bates Nursery, and we are kind of getting back into the swing of our boot camp, and a really timely topic today is drought tolerant plants. And I just want to start by really defining what we're talking about. So when we say drought tolerant, it's really anything that can sustain a limited water supply or no water supply through the growing season. The only thing we need to think about is typically that initial watering, establishment watering for outdoor plants is still usually necessary. So when you plant something, we usually like to see a really deep, heavy water at initial planting, soaking it in. Usually we want to do that with these drought-tolerant plants, but some of them you can really, let's just say, neglect them as far as watering goes through the season. Still, fall can be an easier planting season, but a lot of these plants really are adaptable in this heat to transplanting. So the next level we have from drought tolerance is a term that's gotten popular in the past decade or so, xeriscaping. And that is typically associated with cactus, with, high desert or Saharan desert plants. We get a lot of tropical plants that are Xeriscape plants that we have in the garden center, like the lithops, the living rocks. And all this Xeriscaping means is literally zero water or very minimal water input. So these are ideal plants. Typically we're looking at cactus, succulents, things like that for a Xeriscaping garden. A lot of times people use rock mulch to kind of go with that theme, so we can talk about that, and that can be a theme for your garden. And we do have a big collection on the table. That's going to kind of be the end of our talk today. So we'll get into all these plants, and I'm sure there's a lot of things we don't have today. But generally we want to talk about what we're looking for. So how do we know generally what a drought tolerant plant is? Usually the first thing I look for is the location, the geographical location. So where do we see these plants? Where are these dry places? So prairie, plains, Midwestern, that's a real popular one here. So when we're looking at our prairie grasses, our Arizona cypress, a lot of our coneflowers and things like that, we're looking at these plains, Midwestern, typically west of the Mississippi type landscapes. And if you do have an arid soil, these can do really well. Typically they're going to throw out deep tap roots, which allows them to live for a long time. Like especially with the grasses, they can just really sustain that area once established. Alpine, Rocky Mountains. We do get some of these plants here in Middle Tennessee. Sometimes the issue is the heat for these plants, these Alpine dry plants. We do get some of them, so like our Colorado blue spruce, some of our annuals, a lot of our needled evergreens could be considered Alpine plants. The issue there is going to be how hot it gets in the summer. They can take the dry, not always the heat in the summer. So that's a cold dry, the Alpine. Tropical desert, so things that have a mild winter, things that are kind of a temperate climate all year round, and a lot of that's going to be our indoor plant material for those types of climates. And then our hot deserts, which is going to be a lot of what we're going to talk about. So your yucca, your cactus, things that come from extremely dry, hot locations. Then again, the issue is going to be how cold does it get where it grows, and how cold does it get here. We have a lot of options in Middle Tennessee for all of these climate zones. So if you have a certain geographical landscape you like, you might be able to use plants from that if it's kind of a dry location. And then the other thing I'm going to talk about is traits. So what kind of clues us into that this is a drought tolerant plant? So a lot of times we get hairs on leaves. Sometimes we'll call this pubescence on the leaves. It's literally a fuzzy leaf. See if I have an example for you here. Typically, coneflower is going to have that. So we have, and you could probably even see that on camera, there's fuzz on the stems of this plant. hairs. It's got a coarse texture. This helps the plant essentially stay cool. These act as a cooling fan for the plant. So if you see these hairs on the stems of the plant, that's a good sign that it's going to be drought tolerant. Fine textured foliage. So we have Russian sage in front of the camera here with the purple pink flowers. We have yarrow. That's got a real fine textured leaf, which also allows that plant to cool off in the heat and allows it to conserve its water. So things with these really fine textures can be a good indicator of drought tolerance. Thick and succulent leaves kind of go in the other direction. So sedum, stonecrop, cactus, things like that. I've got a little sedum kind of hiding back here. They have a waxy, thick, and a leaf that holds water inside, and that gives them longevity. A lot of these plants suffer from an issue if they get overwatered. They just can't handle that because of their water content. So things that have a succulent leaf are really a good cue, as well as blue and gray tone plants, which we have on the table. So the Russian sage, we've got this rattlesnake master that's got that gray-blue tone. Arizona cypress, a lot of our native prairie grasses, so that kind of gray, purple tone is a sign that this is a drought-tolerant plant. Some non-drought tolerant plants, like fescue, can turn gray when they're hitting drought. So this is kind of a sign that when this plant does this, when it's looking good, should be able to take the heat. Rough texture and spines. So things with spines, rough texture. So like I said, a rattlesnake master, it's not really painful, but it does have spines all over these leaves. It's just a very rugged looking plant. You know, that ruggedness can cue us into its tolerance of drought. And then lastly, needled evergreens. Don't have a lot in here today, but like I said, Arizona cypress, really our evergreens that don't have our broad holly leaf, arborvitae, like I said, Cypress, so the cypresses, Juniper, one of my favorites. All of these plants really thrive and grow in the drought and in the sun. Okay, that's kind of all the just roundabout way of describing these plants. I'd like to go ahead and take a look at what we have on the table here. So let me get my coffee out of the way. Okay. Tropicals, annuals, this is the thing we don't have the most examples here, or really no examples of on the table. A lot of people are familiar with our drought-tolerant Mediterranean tropicals. So mandevilla, bougainvillea, olives, pomegranates, things like that we typically plant. They'll grow all through our warm growing season. And then typically, they're either going to die in the winter, or a lot of these you can bring inside and overwinter and put them back out. Generally, these are going to like that kind of mild, warm, dry climate. And those are going to be really the tropicals we're looking for. A lot of our palms really can't take extreme drought, generally. And then cactus, so desert plants. And that's kind of a no-brainer. Most people know that. Desert plants can actually take some water, and they can also take a lot of drought. So very versatile. The only one of these that you can plant outside and leave is a prickly pear cactus. In a really hard winter, they can die back, but prickly pear cactus can survive here over the winter, and that one can be an indoor plant or an outdoor plant as well. Okay, so that was tropical annuals, small category. You know, a lot of our annuals are drought tolerant. Like I said, if we're following that fuzzy leaf texture, things with succulent leaves, that can all be an indication. Perennials, so that's a lot of what we have on the table here. We did mention yarrow, that's kind of right there in front of the camera there. This is a really cool colored yarrow. They come in typically hot colors, so yellows, oranges, all those colors, very resilient in the heat. I mean, these things can go in a rock garden, planted between rocks, and they will thrive in that location. Typically cut them back at the end of the winter, but a really easy to deal with plant as far as watering goes. Maybe the only downside might be is they can kind of open up and you may need to snip them here and there to keep them tidy. But that's going to be kind of a prairie herb style plant and kind of in the same category as Russian sage. So Perovskia, I believe this is a variety blue jean baby. So they make some dwarves. Got this on the edge of my flower garden. No water whatsoever. It outcompetes with Bermuda grass. Very resilient. Like I said, a lot of these can be a little rangy, but if you can use that to your advantage in the bed to break up the texture, you can really find a place for all these. I do have some milkweed, and I've just noticed milkweed really is drought tolerant, Asclepius. And I think that's primarily because it is essentially a tuber underground, or it kind of has a semi-bulb underground where it can really store a lot of water, a lot of nutrients. And I've noticed after its first year, these really seem to not wilt in the full sun. Now, of course, if they go dry as a bone and we're having 100-degree days, they can burn, but overall, mine have been very resilient. Other perennials, so we have Black-Eyed Susan, fairly popular. This is Gold Rush. Most people are familiar with Goldsturm. That's a real popular one. This one just has more prolific flowers. Typically, in the Rudbeckia family, it's going to be mostly yellows. They've started to experiment with different colors, but, you know, this is one of those prairie plants. Extremely drought tolerant, fuzzy, thick leaves. And then what we looked at earlier, the purple coneflower. And this is a really special one. This is Tennessensis, and we have quite a few right now. So this is the native to Middle Tennessee coneflower. And as far as I know, they were worried that this was going to go extinct until they started propagating it and finding it in the wild, and now it's available for us in our garden. So this is a great one if you want to really promote our true native plants to our area. So this is Echinacea tennessensis. Rattlesnake Master. So we mentioned that one with the coarse foliage. I'll give you all a view of the blooms here. You know, again, it's got that rugged texture. I've got one of these a couple years old, and it stands about 6 feet tall with these blooms. Again, very rugged, but pollinators love them. If you can put them kind of in the middle back of a perennial bed, they can kind of give you that pop of height and color, but very sturdy. Really, these blooms will last all the way into winter. So that's another good prairie plant with a nice taproot in it. Let's see what else we have for perennials on this table. I do have Heuchera. Again, this is kind of a part shade plant, but you know, we do need to talk about a little bit of dry shade. So Heuchera is a fairly resilient plant, some more than others, but a lot of these with these darker leaves, thicker leaves, they can really hold a lot of color. They're going to be better than hosta in a drought situation. And there's other dry shade perennials, but this is probably the one that sticks out to me as being very resilient. All right, I think that's most all the perennials. Again, there's a lot of perennials, especially sun perennials out there. I meant to grab a sage, so salvia, anything in the salvia family can be a really good option. We talked about sedum. So I've got here called Lime Zinger, which is kind of a cool sedum. Tyler, our editor back there, he said that Autumn Joy, which is a great sedum, that'll get you about 1 foot to 2 feet tall with blooms in the fall. Very, very drought tolerant. In fact, usually the issue I see with these is overwatering. So if you're someone who likes to plant and forget, sedum is wonderful. A lot of times I've thrown sedum cuttings into mulch and they have rooted and grown with no work whatsoever. So sedum, that's Lime Zinger. It's kind of got that, that kind of purple lipstick on it. And then there's also creeping stone crops for stepables. Most people are familiar with that. So you can get a whole slew of colors, yellows, reds, things like that. This is Angelina, another sedum stone crop, kind of a low creeping variety. And hens and chicks, most people are familiar with that. So now we're getting into kind of the cactus succulent area. This one's Red Reuben. And there's so many varieties of hens and chicks. I usually keep mine in terracotta just to keep them dry. So this is a great succulent, steppable. You can cram it in between rocks and it'll spread. Really great for a drought tolerant garden. Full sun as well? Full sun, yeah, full sun. 6 hours minimum. You know, these things will probably start getting some rot issues and shade. But I actually have some on our screened-in porch, and, you know, as long as they're getting 3 hours of sun a day, they seem to be okay if kept dry. All right, trees and shrubs, and kind of in the middle ground grasses, and I have these standing ovation, these little blue stems, and I just think the color on these is really great. When we're talking about that, and I don't know if y'all will be able to pick it up on the camera, but there's a lot of purple and blue and really kind of subdued tones in this, and this is kind of that really quintessential prairie look. We have a lot of switch grasses that have a really solid blue tone in them when they get big. This is that kind of drought tolerant grass look, and grasses in general like to be on the drier side. Again, this is standing ovation. They've kind of bred this to stay tighter. That's always been the drawback of grasses. They kind of want to open up. But this is a full sun, you know, maybe part shade, but dry shade plant. But I just love the textures of these, and if you plant them in massings, you can really get a lot of color out of them. Again, a native grass, prairie grass, so, you know, we're promoting natives, anything that wants to subsist on a native, the seed heads on the native, which I know Joy has definitely talked about a few times. Really great to be able to use these that are from our area. Vitex, so I don't know if we can see that. I've got a Vitex over here in the corner. Yeah, there you go. So there's a Vitex. That is a Japanese big shrub, small tree. I believe that one is Shoal Creek, which is one of the bigger varieties. I have Blue Diddley at my house, and they are just rock solid, easy, super drought tolerant, great for bees and pollinator attracting, great color and texture. So Vitex is one of those nice Japanese plants that we've noticed it just really can take the heat. I don't think I've ever hardly seen it get like a sunburn or a sun scorch. So Vitex is definitely a really popular one around here. Nandina. You know, we see Nandina in a lot of landscapes, and you know, you may say it's overused, but it always has a place because it's so resilient, so tolerant, and it gives us that color year-round. You know, I think you can use it sparingly, but there's always a spot that a Nandina just is going to be able to thrive in where nothing else will. So this is one of my favorites, lemon lime. It doesn't really have those warm textures that firepower Nandina has, but it's got this kind of nice lemon lime green texture, which I just find appealing. I think it goes well with blooming plants, just to give you that background, maybe as a substitute for a boxwood or something like that, so you get that green tone. So that's Nandina, another Japanese origin plant, very drought, very heat tolerant, and evergreen. Arizona cypress. So this is kind of one of these needled evergreens, Arizona cypress, just like its name. Most of the issues I see with these are staying wet and getting too wet either in the spring or the summer, and they can start to kind of shut down with too much water. So these really love a dry, well-drained location. They give you that blue tone again we were talking about. This is a substitute for Leyland cypress, green giant, and things of that nature, and those are also great plants for drought. Juniper, which I do have a little juniper hidden behind here. So juniper, kind of one of my favorites for full sun, drought tolerance. Juniper's notorious for kind of growing in a marginal, tough location. So if you're really wanting to plant and forget in a full sun arid spot, I mean, juniper is a Mediterranean plant. You know, it really thrives in that condition. This is a gray owl, which is bred off of our native juniper, eastern red cedar. So, you know, you can still go into that native zone where it'll put on the native juniper fruit. So, juniper, great option. There's tall ones, skinny ones, topiary. And these needled evergreens all tend to flush in this hot summer. The only thing I would say with these evergreens is they do need to be watered if planted in the summer, and they do need good drainage. So sometimes we get in the situation where they need to dry out, but we need to water them. And if the soil holds too much water, we kind of end up in this area where we find it hard to kind of do the right thing for the tree. So with these needled evergreens, really conditioning our soil, we have a great product, P-Fines, which I would use for these needled evergreens mixed in to make sure they drain. That lack of drainage can kind of make it difficult to water them appropriately. So that's my disclaimer on needled evergreens. Barberry. So I've got a barberry right here. It's kind of got that flame red, really popular for color contrast. So these comes in reds, yellows, oranges, super bright colors. They do have barbs on them, but really not that bad. These do lose their leaves in the winter, but you know, as far as heat, drought tolerance, and color performance, I mean, these things really are, if you want to play with those tones, contrast, Barberry is one of the boldest and extremely drought tolerant. And then the last shrub I want to talk about is one of our favorites for really summertime resilience. And, you know, it gets kind of a bad rap, I think, sometimes, is boxwood, but really in the heat and drought, boxwood is notoriously tough. I've got a couple of 1-gallon boxwood in very small pots, and we probably water them once a week, and they barely show any signs of stress. So boxwood, you know, I usually suggest this for containers because it will tend to run hot and dry in a container. There's so many varieties of boxwood. This is one of the new gen boxwoods that's bred to be disease resistant. So, you know, all these diseases, issues we've heard out boxwood, they're trying to breed tougher, more resilient varieties. And just really a great plant. They will stay glossy and green on a 100-degree day. So boxwood, I think it's a great option for somewhere in your garden if you just need a green palette or a green canvas to work with. So don't write boxwood off for those hot, sunny pots, for those beds that just need some green and that are just getting blaring sun. Boxwood is a great option. And that's mostly what I have here. Like I said, I'm sure there's a ton of other plants that are drought tolerant. These are just the ones that stand out the most to me. You know, there's definitely hydrangeas like limelights, which are very drought tolerant. For a hydrangea, we hardly see them have water issues. And I'm sure numerous other plants. Again, that's why we kind of have some guidelines for what to look for. I'd like to wrap up with just a few suggestions for planting these. Well-draining soil, like I mentioned with the needled evergreens. Using P-Fines, or we do have a shale product that you could mix into your soil to really promote that drainage. Shale and sand would be more for like cactus and succulents. But, you know, something that's going to allow it to drain really well, because we just don't want the opportunity for water to sit. And that's something we can't control. Full sun conditions. So most of these like full sun, 6 hours plus, they can still get transplant shock. Even though they're heat tolerant, they can still show signs within the first month of kind of stressing out. So, you know, do be prepared to water for the first month, you know, maybe a few times a week on these. But like I said, mostly full sun, some exceptions like Heuchera, things like that. And then watering only when it's dried out. So we just don't want to risk over watering these drought tolerant plants. So whenever we're watering, just checking the plant and making sure it's not still moist. If it's still moist, give it a day or two, check it again, and then soak it. So we want to make sure our plants dry out, and then we can water them real well. All right. That's all I have planned for y'all today. Again, we're going into the hot part of summer. We've had a little rain, but overall, I've had some drought conditions in my yard. I've seen cracks in the soil, things like this, which are making me think more and more about what I can plant and what's going to be easy maintenance in these hot, hot summers. So just to give you all some ideas going forward into the summer and what's going to be resilient for you. So yeah, do we have any questions to wrap up?
We're waiting for questions to come in, so if you have any other things to say before we... Oh, wait, we got one just now. Leyland cypress tree is browning from the center out. Is it dying? Is there something I can do?
Typically, browning from the center out is going to be a natural, non-concerning issue. I'm usually, if I see dieback from the tips Inward, we want to look at insects, disease, pathogens, stuff like that. Interior shedding is typically a natural sign of growth. And even though it is an evergreen, it will still shed those leaves that aren't getting sun. So as long as you're seeing green growth on the outside of that plant, that interior shedding is just a natural process of it growing. You can take a leaf blower, your hands, and you can kind of get those to shed if you need to. But if it's interior, that doesn't really worry me too much.
Okay, and we do have a question. Do we sell bulk compost? I'm about to post in the chat a link to our bulk soils and compost. We also have bulk mulch. But Ben, if you wanted to expound upon that at all?
Yeah. I mean, we do sell a lot of bulk mulch, bulk soils. I know the compost can be a little, typically we were well stocked, but the compost does take a little more work to prepare. So sometimes it's nice to check with us to make sure that we've got plenty of that bulk product available. But yeah, we do most all of our products, actually all of our products in bags for convenience, and then most of our products we can do in bulk, which are half scoops at 3/4 of a yard and full scoops at 1.5 yards. So or more like 1.25 yards, 1.25 yards.
Yeah, about 1.25 yards.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you have a pickup truck or a trailer, that is definitely going to be the most cost-effective way this time of year. A lot of mulching's going on this time of year, which is a great way to conserve your moisture, make your beds look pretty. You know, if you're kind of reluctant to plant, which is okay, it's a great time to mulch and add color to those beds and kind of help with the water.
And speaking of mulching, we do have a webinar coming up. We haven't gotten it up on the website just yet, but it will be July the 20th that's a Tuesday, approaches to mulching, and I will be teaching that webinar. So if you have any, questions pertaining to that, we'll save them for that webinar. I look forward to covering the different types of mulch, things for pathways, things for beds, things that can really hold moisture, things that will resist washing away if you've got a kind of rain-prone area. Yeah.
He's probably going to talk about not over-mulching, too.
Yes, there is too much mulch,
yeah.
And we'll address that as well.
Yeah. Which happens from time to time. A lot of times we just forget to pull off our old mulch before we pile some new stuff on. So, yeah.
Right. I am not seeing any other questions, so okay. I guess we can wrap up. I'm just going to go ahead and say that we have this Friday at 9 a.m. Hydrangeas 101 webinar with Austin Lowen. So be sure to sign up for that on our website. You can just go to batesnursery.com and then scroll down and hit register now under the webinars. And you'll see our calendar and as well as a newsletter that we send out occasionally with webinar updates. We'll have Japanese maples the following week and shade plants with Ben. So another round of good plants for the landscape that are, a little less sunny.
Yeah, we've still got plant material coming in a little bit slower, but, we're trying to bring in the tough stuff right now. And I know we've got some new hydrangeas, and so we're still going full steam here at the nursery. So come on out and find something you like.